first off, how many of y'all like have experience with charcoal? Probably several of you, right? Honestly, I hated charcoal, like hated it when I first got to college. I was never taught how to manipulate it when I was in high school. My teacher didn't believe in that stuff. He was like a solid graphite guy, and he pretty much worked with gouache watercolors over his graphite drawings, and that was it. I mean, like I never learned how to acrylic paint or do any of that stuff until I got here. And I'm not sure how, everybody got some? Yes? Cool. All right. I'm not sure how you were taught to use charcoal, but I use it very painterly, right? So I think charcoal is a great way to segue drawing into painting. The idea is to get the media on the paper and then move that media around on that paper and kind of move it into the paper, right? So smudging is absolutely appropriate. If you're somebody that likes to get your hands into the work, great, go for it. I do that a lot with large areas. I just try to make sure that I'm not really pushing in, like too much, right? Because I want to be able to take that vine back off, if that's a thing. If I have like really lighter values that I'm trying to accomplish, like a twos and threes with some highlights up in there, I'll use a brush or I'll use beauty wedges, those triangle sponge things, like, you know what I'm talking about. So we'll use those. We'll use cotton balls. We'll use a variety of different things to get that on there. But if you're going like for a solid black area, that's when I start using my hands to work that charcoal into the paper, to the tooth of the paper. Like if I know I'm not gonna have to erase it again later. So your stump's gonna be a two-sided thing. The idea is that you probably wanna, I don't know, the way that I do it anyway, I like to keep a really sharp side and I like to keep a more blunt side so that I can use the more blunt areas for like wider lines that I actually wanna draw into my work. And I like to keep the really, like one side really, really sharpened well so that I can use that for more detail work, right? As these become nasty, okay, you're gonna want to use these strips to clean them off. And the easiest way to do that is to basically try to get the angle of your stump on there. And what I do is I pull and twist it like over and over, and that kind of like pulls off the old paper that's like nasty with charcoal. It pulls off the charcoal, but it also keeps that nice point, right? Occasionally, if my stump gets really nasty and I'm like really trying to get it nice and clean, I'll use an X-Acto knife to shave it, but you got to be super careful with that because if you gouge it, like all that texture is going to be a thing when you're drawing, right? So grab a stump. Yes, we'll pass those around here. I do have some detail, like really sharp, tiny stumps that we'll probably have to break out eventually, like when we get closer to the end of the project and we're really focusing on those little details and those nuances, right? I'm gonna pass around this compressed charcoal too. So go ahead and grab a chunk of that. I have this really dense stick stuff that hasn't been messed up yet. So if you grab one of these, hang on to that. But you're not gonna really, you're not gonna need a whole lot of compressed right now. You will later. When it comes to sticking these things in your pencil bag, it's a good idea to try to keep them isolated from all the other stuff. Otherwise, you're gonna end up with a pencil bag like I have. It's like basically like a charcoal dust bag, right? You wanna make sure this doesn't get on your other drawing media. Okay. So what we're doing today to get used to this and get acclimated to charcoal practice, you're going to be drawing an eye, a nose, a mouth, and an ear. We have all the other stuff except for the eye, but I was able to get a few portrait plaster examples from G's painting class so that we could set those up for doing an eye. When you do this, I don't want you to draw like frontal, right? Remember that your reference photo should be a 3/4, right? So try to set up your mouth and your nose and your eye at more of a 3/4. But when you're doing the ear, I don't think I have any examples out here, I'll break those out later. It might be more appropriate for you to go ahead and draw that like straight on, because a lot of times that 3/4, you're seeing a lot of the ear, right? The paper that I have for this is this newsprint here. It'll work fine. Feel free to put more than one of these elements on the paper as we're doing this. What I'm gonna do is visit with you all kind of individually as you're working on your examples for each one of these facial features, and we're going to talk about your photos that you've shot, right? And if you have an iPhone, great. You can go ahead and airdrop that to my computer. I've got a flash drive that I can load those up and get those printed off for you. I think I've decided to select this one from like my grouping of stuff that I showed y'all last week. It came out a little grainy, right? So I'm gonna get most of my information on the large paper first. When I have it blocked out and I'm ready to start moving into detail, then I'm gonna work off the digital image that I have either on my phone or my computer. So that's a good idea. That way you can like zoom in and take a look at stuff. I actually, like when I first printed this out, it wasn't the right size. And so I had to trim it down, drop it on the photocopier and enlarge that. So if that happens to you, that's something we can manipulate to make sure it's got the right picture frame of reference, right? Cool. So I'm just gonna do kind of a fast charcoal demo. I've kind of done a very, very, very light pencil sketch of this, I don't know, it's Caesar or something like that. This guy, how you doing, buddy? You're gonna get drawn today. You can see that he's really, really not excited about this, right? He's like, ugh. Kind of looks demonic, I think, a little bit. The way I like to do charcoal is that I block in my stuff first with extremely light pencil. If you go heavy and you're using like a 6B, 4B, something like that, that graphite is gonna lock up the paper and you're not gonna be able to add charcoal over the top very well, right? That charcoal needs access to the paper fiber so you can push it in appropriately. We're gonna be using a Lennox paper. It's a really, really nice multi-purpose paper. There are two sides to it. There's a toothy side that's really textured and there's a smoother side. We're gonna use the textured side. It's best for charcoal because we want it to have some kind of a texture to like drop that charcoal in there. Otherwise, we're gonna end up having issues, right? The backside, like we'll use Lennox for a lot of other projects. The backside's really good for ink. It's really good for pencil drawings as well. It's good mixed media too. So I always start with my vine, right? And I always start by kind of blocking in. When I talk about blocking in, like I'm not interested in drawing a bunch of line work necessarily. I'm gonna drop values in a really kind of general way. I'm just gonna start with the eye that's closest to me. I feel like that'll be a good illustration, right? If you find that you have difficulty working with the charcoal medium, it's a good idea to drop some charcoal off to the side and just play with it a little bit, you know? Like blend it around a little bit with your hands, blend it with your stump. That way you can understand the capabilities of this medium before you get to application, right? Because there are certain aspects of charcoal that I think are really, really nice because you can still do some correction. Other aspects of it can be really challenging because once you get compressed charcoal on there, you've kind of locked in your decision making. So I'm kind of just getting those dark areas. I'm trying to avoid the light areas right now. And then I just blend that in. And you're gonna see that when you start to blend your vine charcoal in, it's gonna lose its intensity a little bit. Like when I have a larger area, and I'll kind of demonstrate that here in a sec, then I move to a different type of moving tool. Like, you know, if I had brushes, I would use that. In this case, just to get started, I'm gonna use my hands to kind of like work that in. Be mindful about the idea that yes, you're gonna have charcoal all over your hands, and human beings touch their face a lot. I didn't really realize this until I started working with a lot of charcoal and getting pretty good at it. And then my students will just let me walk throughout the day with charcoal all over my face, and I look like I've been working in a mechanic shop. And then I encounter one of my friends across campus. They're like, oh, you got stuff on your face. I'm like, my students didn't tell me. Okay, so when I kind of have that worked in, then I smooth it in. So again, you can kind of see how it can be used very painterly, right? Then I'm gonna get a little bit of detail involved in there. I always start with vine, and then I use kind of the same patterns and stuff that I'm developing to deepen with compressed. So you should get your modeling mostly completed and then move in there with some compressed to like push the value a little bit more. A lot of people will try to draw the whole image with vine and okay, it looks really, really good. And then when you drop a little compressed charcoal on there, you'll see that the value of the Vine charcoal is just not adequate to get a full range of values. Like you can already kind of see how light this whole thing is right now. It's like contrast, it's really not there, right? But what's cool about it is that if I make mistakes at this point, I can always use my detail eraser or an edge of my eraser here to pull out little highlights. Like I probably should have left that bottom eyelid a little bit lighter. So I'm just gonna go in there and kind of sculpt that a little bit. Then I'll deepen underneath just somewhat. So again, I'm not gonna bring this whole drawing up for the sake of giving you some time to experiment on your own. And I've had students use charcoal in a variety of different ways. You know, some of them just want to jump right in and use the compress. They feel brave. But I don't advise that. It's best to work out your value scale and everything in terms of how you want it in Vine, and then go in and augment and supplement with your compressed. And you'll find in those detail areas, like in the eyes, when you have wrinkles and things like that, that's when you want to switch to those pencils. And I don't always blend everything in, but right now I'm just trying to get like a good smooth block in. So I think the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and push that. There's like a little section inside of here that I can see from my perspective. It's pretty dark. And I just use the corner of my compressed. And usually I'll get it kind of in the middle of a dark area, and then I'll use my stump to move it and blend it out so I can get a good smooth transition from that into the other values. So with chiaroscuro, it's all about that intense contrast. It's all about trying to bring those values in opposition to one another so that we can really get a nice likeness that is bold. Some people I know like to take their compressed and like grind it into the sandpaper, and then they will dip their drawing utensil in that and then use that more as a pencil type thing. Because once you get enough of this on here, you can draw pretty well with this thing. So I encourage you to experiment with everything that you think you might be able to use. In fact, I think I should probably get a little bit more on there. But getting good with charcoal has really informed my ability to paint. Like I said, I came into college with no knowledge whatsoever about charcoal, without no knowledge about acrylic painting, oil painting, any of that stuff. So you're going to create the best likeness that you can out of those 4 elements. And you're going to find that this stuff gets all over the place. So you will probably want to be careful with your clothes if you're worried about that kind of stuff. Or if you're like me and you just live an artist's life and you're not worried about that. People be like, your clothes are dirty. I'm like, I'm an artist. It's an occupational hazard. It's cool. No worries. Let me get like a little bit underneath this cheek here. It's also a good thing for you to practice laying down really smooth values, because when you have strokes on the paper like this, sometimes it will show. And that's why I like to do a lot of blending to pull that in. Try to get rid of those strokes if I can. Pull a little highlight right here. Go in and deepen this just a touch on the edge in the corner. You'll also find that there's certain advantages to doing this on the table flat over drawing on an easel. Those of you that are up here close or you're watching closely, you're probably seeing that a lot of my charcoal's fallen down and it's getting this area messy. So sometimes I will switch between the easel and the table, just depending on what the job calls for. I'm going to grab a couple of charcoal pencils and mess with those a bit. This is a good medium. That's going to help me to control a lot of the value that's inside the eye. These seem to sharpen best with the pencil sharpeners that are in your kit. You have pencil sharpeners in your kit, don't you? Yes? Good. I think the other class was deprived of that. I feel bad for them. Using an X-Acto on these tends to cause the charcoal to break for whatever reason. And be careful not to drop those charcoal pencils on the ground because they will just shatter inside. And then it's sad pants for you. You'll be wearing sad pants all day. It's no good. Got a lot of linear stuff going on up in here. So again, think about your charcoal pencils as compressed, really, because they behave like compressed charcoal. Very difficult to erase them off, so you want to make sure that your decisions are like solid before you start laying stuff down. We're working on a pretty big project here. It's going to be important that you all make good progress each day. It's going to be important that you all invest a little bit more time outside of class on these things. I have decided not to do another sketchbook assignment this week to give you more time to get a huge jump on this project. So think about that time you would normally spend on sketchbook and dedicate it to this project. Once you get your imagery on good paper, it's going to be extremely important for you to take care of your paper. So be mindful about where you draw, what you put your paper on. Also, I'd very much like for you, if you're an Instagrammer, to post progress pics, and I will put my Instagram up if you care to share with me. Okay, so today's about practice, more or less. I think you'll have what you need. If you want to jump first into an eye, right, you'll have to grab one of the portraits that are up here. There are 4 of them here. There's this big boy here. Be careful with these because they just have a little rod inside. Like, I've picked these up multiple times and had the bottom drop off, and it's like, it's a bad thing. So hold it like a baby that you care about. So who has imagery that I can look at? Because that's what I'm pumped about. Several of you do.